Something here is calling us forward, upward motion. We're drops in one ocean. Roll on.
Will you rise up with me today? Lift up your voice
and boldly say,
we are the ones we've been waiting for. Live the dream of your highest calling. Be the hope of a new day dawning. We're the ones who can make a difference.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us on this recorded session with Reverend Erin McCabe. Erin is the Senior Minister of Unity Village Chapel, the local and live stream spiritual community located at Unity World Headquarters. She is also a new council member of the Association for Global New Thought. Erin is the founder and director of Campaign for Consciousness, a singer, songwriter, and environmental advocate with a passion for nature and sustainable living. She is someone who brings to the table a passionate flair, inspiring a higher consciousness and encouraging us to cast our vote. As the Dalai Lama said, the world is a spiritual democracy and you vote with your life. And you can learn more about Erin and her ministry at unityvillagechapel.org or campaignforconsciousness.com or erinmccabemusic.com. So, hi Erin, can you give us a sound level so I make sure that your sound is on right now?
There we go.
Okay, now you're great. So thanks for joining us. There are quite a few people tuning into this recorded session, and I thought that, as we always do on these programs, that I could ask you to start us off with an opening blessing, please.
Absolutely. It is a delight to be here together in consciousness today. So let's just take a deep breath together, knowing that our work in consciousness is our most important presencing. So we just breathe into this moment, right where we are, knowing that we have arrived right here and right now through divine appointment, knowing that this moment is full of all things good, all things God, all things love. So we breathe into the here and now, allowing ourselves to become fully present to what this moment has to offer and what we bring to this moment. We bring to this moment a collective consciousness, a unique joining of individuals and minds and hearts that is joined for a specific purpose on this day. So we set an intention right here and right now in this collective space. We are an inlet and an outlet of all that is God. This is love. This is wisdom. This is our birthright. And so it is. Namaste.
Okay, now I'm on. You can hear me, right?
Yes.
So these conversations are fun because they're informal. They really are conversations. What we're doing now is exploring the big questions with our AG&T Leadership Council members. So that's kind of the focus of our webinar tonight with you, Reverend Erin. And the reason for this is that with unprecedented levels of stimuli and information that are streaming at us these days from every direction, sorting out what's true or even what matters can be a pretty difficult task. So we thought it might be a good idea to take a step backward and inward and kind of take a deep breath and explore the backdrop to how we're responding to current day crises and opportunities. We're here because the spiritual ground of New Thought is our foundation for renewed and resilient values that will help us understand what is ours to do as we move forward. So with that in mind, we just have some questions that we want to explore with you. And we want to begin with a light discussion about the fact that I happen to know, and your colleagues happen to know, that you're leading a very big life these days, which includes running a major Unity ministry, being instrumental in on the campus at Unity headquarters. You're a part of the Leadership Council for AG&T, and now you're getting ready to give birth to your first child as a single mother who's held in a beloved community. So I guess the question that I'd like to explore with you back and forth is, what do we learn from these moments or experiences that have the power to cause us to radically shift our values and priorities and to transform our perspective from the ego mind to one of mindfulness? Because the situation and the amount of responsibility and experience that you're handling these days has probably caused you to take a good deep look at what are your values and your priorities and what really matters stepping forward, and what kind of inner support do you draw upon in order for that to be possible in your life as it is right now?
Yeah, well, I think that's a good question. And I think one of the keys is that as we get centered in our purpose, and as life seems to get bigger around us or within us, we have to really be in discernment about what our attention goes to, and where our minds are. And, we have to make choices and discernments about what gets our attention. And so, looking at one's own inner patterns and looking at how one shows up for their own life, and being able to release some of the, we can call them ego ideas or ego responses, but being able to get through the minutia more quickly and apply our spiritual practice so that we can come from our center, so that we can really show up to what matters. There's not as much time, whether it's in our own individual lives, in my life, or whether it's just looking out at the news in this day and age, there's not as much time to get distracted. We can, that's available for all of us all the time. But the more we go down rabbit holes of things that don't empower us, or things that don't empower greatness in our world, the more we're just kind of, on the sidetrack of doing mental work that creates more chaos. And so I think this is a time for me personally, and a time for all of us collectively, to continually return to the center, to continually return to the spiritual practice. And that's kind of takes a dance between, practicing awareness of the absolute realm, where we just come from center, and it doesn't matter if there's chaos happening around us. We're willing to come from our peace and from our power and our center, and then also being present to the human condition and waking up more quickly each time when we find we're going down those rabbit holes.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and what it brings to mind for me, because, I've become, like, I've never really been in my life kind of a news junkie. At a time when a lot of the New Thought people are making a decision just to stay away from the news, because there's not a lot of good news, apparently, or as Dr. Michael Beckwith would say, but the headlines are really just prayer requests. And so I'm trying to look at it and educate myself from that point of view. But what you're talking about right now makes me think that both at the personal level, say in your own personal life right now, and at the professional and world level, we're a little bit split, because if you're like me, I have emotional responses to the things that are going on, not just in my life, but in the news, just like sort of rampant, uncontrollable, either sadness or fear or anger, or just, strong emotions that sometimes surprise me that are coming up now in this kind of, overstimulating climate. And then there's this other part, which is my mind, my rationality, my spiritual practice. And I guess what I want to explore with you a little bit is, do you have some tricks or some keys or some insight about knowing that we are emotional human beings, knowing that we are mental and intellectual human beings and spiritual human beings, how do you balance those parts when the one that you least want to show up at any given moment is the one that shows up?
Right, right. Well, I think part of that is really surrender to the process, because what you were, mentioning earlier about tuning into it and being able to be present to this and watch what's going on in the world and watch what's happening in the news and not call it wrong that our hearts are breaking open. Like, allow that to be part of the practice, because the last thing we want to do is shut down and do some sort of spiritual override where we just flood ourselves with affirmations and flood ourselves with things that are really like saying, I won't look at this. I won't look at this. We practice this a lot on the individual level. And I think in New Thought, we've gotten pretty good at being able to not suppress our feelings and the moment and what's going on, being able to step out of the consciousness where we're at war with ourselves and being able to just recognize, this is what is in this moment. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm present to. And how can I, rather than when things are up, how can I, rather than put the brakes on it and say, no, how can I just lay back into the river and allow the river to carry me and know that those emotions, those feelings, those tears, whatever that is actually a portal to awakening, a portal to getting wisdom, a portal to stepping into your power, a portal to knowing what is yours to do, to step forward and to act. I think that that's key, because the other piece on a greater outward collective level, when you look at the news and when you look at what's going on in our world and in our country right now, you can have the tendency to just start shutting down and looking away or repressing. And that's not where our power is. I was listening to just something the other day, or something I was reading. I forget what it was in. Maybe it was someone's talk, but it was just a mention of one philosophy, but I found it interesting. It said something about that it's better to take wrong action than it is to take no action at all. Like, when we're just stagnant, when we're frozen, when we're just a couch potato or ignoring everything, we cannot be moved. We're not movable. We're not listening. So the ideas that can come to us of feeling disempowered at times and not knowing, how do I move forward, or what do I do? I think we need to step into that part of us that can be fearless and that can just feel things, take action, move forward, and trust that even if I'm going in a direction and I don't know what direction I'm going, as long as I have movement, I can be moved. As long as I am listening, I will hear. As long as I have attention, then I can activate that intention and move it towards good, so that we don't shut ourselves down and turn ourselves off.
Yeah, that's great. I love what you're getting at here. I'm just going to share with the viewers just it's actually the homepage of the AGNT.today website. And it gets exactly to your point. Let me see if I can bring it up here. Can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
And the quote that we chose is by Mohandas K. Gandhi. It is the action, not the fruit of the action, that's important. You have to do the right thing. It may not be in your power, may not be in your time, that there will be any fruit. But that doesn't mean you stop doing the right thing. You may never know what results came from your action, but if you do nothing, there will be no result. So yeah. I think that a lot of times we get hung up on our perfectionism or our political correctness or our fear or low self-esteem, in that we feel insecure if we're not getting the proper affirmation from the external world. And therefore, in order to avoid a negative effect, we try not to put out too many triggers to the world,
right?
And so we don't get jumped on.
Right.
But I think that the answer to that is that in general, we have to train ourselves and expect or respect others enough to know that we're becoming a more compassionate society. That's the vision that I'm holding. And to that end, before the last webinar that we recorded, I asked some of our viewers to send us questions too. And we got a nice question from, I think it was Reverend Kathleen Lenover. And she asked about compassion. She said, how do we cultivate more of that God quality in our own lives? Historically, the model we have used to personally succeed and to build our societies seems to be one of domination, competition, and exclusivity. Spiritual development calls on us to be more inclusive, collaborative, sharing, and willing to integrate all stages. So how do we get closer to that new model? Do you want to riff on that for a minute?
Yeah, I really think that model is the core of our being. I think that is the true nature in humanity. Charles Fillmore talks about the carnal mind, and that's kind of the part that can not be in the fullness of spirit, that can just be our animal nature. And that nature, has some base on domination, fear, all of these ego-minded or sense of separation, self ideas. But the truth of our being is oneness. The truth of our being is an absolute full recognition that I cannot be separate from anything around me. I cannot be separate from another individual. I cannot be separate from the environment and the air I breathe, the animals around, that we're all one. And if we tune into that truth of our own being, and this is a microcosm and a macrocosm, that means tuning into it in my own self and knowing that I'm, human and divine, and I'm a swirl of everything. If we just tune into our true nature, and we get a sense of what harmony feels like and get a sense of what wholeness feels like, then I think we come from that place. It's when we start getting triggered and our fears come up and our desires to protect our own self-interest come up. Those are the times when we start moving into the psyche that's about domination and control and all of these things. But I don't think that that's the new world order. I think the new world order has to do with our absolute wholeness and what our true nature is, which is always collaborative, which is always compassionate, which is the beauty that we have the ability to really learn who we are and what we are as creatures of this universe, and then begin to model life after that. So when we really step into principle and look at what we are and look at this visible universe, we can see that these other ways are really the only way to be on this planet in harmony. It's this illogical side of the mind that has some idea that I can take something from someone, that I could dominate or enslave or abuse or in some way restrict one part of this majestic universe and gain. That's impossible. It's scientifically impossible. It's environmentally impossible. And it's spiritually impossible. So it's waking up to a spiritual maturity and an emotional maturity and even a scientific maturity to recognize that we have to model what we are. If we model God consciousness and we model our true nature, we will have no problem creating on this planet in ways of harmony, because it just makes sense. It's like we become, toddlers on a playground fighting over something and creating chaos when we do anything other than that. And that's just a learning stage in spiritual development, which is showing up in our world right now. But there are more and more people waking up to the truth of our being and the truth of more advanced ways of being on the planet.
This is why I love talking to you. You're so smart and insightful. I wonder if I was that smart at your age. I kind of doubt it.
It's funny. It's funny because once you get that, once you really look at it, it's impossible to see it any other way. It just, the other ways of being show up as completely absurd. It's really absurd.
Yeah.
To think we could succeed, or to think that we could flourish, or to think that we could create, and in some way that could be good when we're operating from principles that are not aligned with the truth of our being and aren't aligned with love, harmony, compassion, honoring life, all of those things.
There's a friend of mine and of AT&T's for a long time that you and some of our viewers might be familiar with. And she's an evolutionary biologist, and her name is Elizabeth Sahtouris. And she happens to be in town this week because there's a meeting of the Evolutionary Leaders Group here in Santa Barbara. And Elizabeth, as an evolutionary biologist, but also an environmentalist and a scientist of top order, and also very spiritually motivated woman for her entire lifetime, and now she's over 80. She has published studies where she studies communities, whether they be insect communities or primate communities or human communities across a diversity of cultures. And she's outlined, I think it's a set of 15 principles that show up unilaterally, regardless of the type of community that is being represented. And it's as a way of indicating which communities thrive and which tend to die out. And one of the most interesting principles in her list that I have always been attracted to is the fact that she says that communities whose individuals exhibit enlightened self-interest tend to thrive. And the question in the New Thought community is it necessarily a bad thing if I have goals and intentions and visions and desires for my own life? Is that necessarily a bad or a selfish thing? And should I only be thinking about what's good for the world and what's good for the collective and give up my own goals in a sense? Mm-hmm. And what you're saying kind of, I want you to comment on this, but it tends to make me think that the more that we practice spiritual principle, the more we get in tune with our true core of ethics, morality, and values. And once we're able to do that, whatever we manifest in terms of our own self-interest will tend to be enlightened and include what is good for the welfare of the whole, and not include what would be detrimental or destructive to others and therefore do harm to others, and that there's a way of tapping into a way of knowing the difference. So I thought that's very interesting and would like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, I love this conversation, and I love that idea of enlightened self-interest, because I really think that that's one of the keys. I think that we can see ourselves and see our world, and we can either go down a path where we just start looking at where is the need, where is the lack, how do I need to show up so I can fix these things, and that can bring a frantic energy that is not based in inspiration, but based in acknowledging lack, fear, problems, and trying to fix and solve. So that, not calling that bad, that's one way of showing up for things, but it can be a struggle. You know, it can be like looking at the world and looking at your own life and going, lack, I've got to fix. And, you know, then you've got some really hard work ahead of you. And then there can be the side of complete selfish interest. You know, I'm just looking for more money. I'm looking for more power. I'm looking for more manifestations of my own goals so that I can have. Again, that's one way of living. But spiritual life focuses on what am I giving and how am I showing up. And I think that the sweet spot in between comes from, there's a Harold Whitman quote, or maybe it was Howard Thurman. But it was, don't ask yourself what the world needs. Ask yourself what makes you come alive. And go and do that, because what the world needs is people who have come alive. I think the sweet spot is where we tune into an enlightened self-interest and recognize that there are places and spaces where our passion and our inspiration shows up. So whatever triggers us the most, whatever makes our, tears flow, whatever makes our heart just break open, there's something for us there. The places that we're most passionate about. And if we tune our energy, our attention, and our intention to those places, we can have what may seem like self-interest, or it may seem like complete service. But that the line between my self-interest and service will become so blurry that it will just vanish because they really are one. And I think that that's the truth of all of our beings. It's like, in nature, in the environment, there are so many examples where, a tree or a seed or an ecosystem process does whatever it does. And it does it for itself because that's how it, flowers into a plant, or that's how it regrows the forest, or whatever it is. So the process is seemingly for itself. A bee pollinating, it's living its own life. It's doing what the bee needs to do to survive. But in what the bee does, it is pollinating and it is creating for the greater good for all. And in what the plant and the environment and the ecosystem does naturally, that could look like it is to benefit one, is actually something that will just sweep a benefit over the whole environment. And we are no different. When we tune into that, enlightened self-interest, it is just natural that what we do for ourselves will be used for the whole and used for the greater good. And I think that's just the sweet spot where we recognize, like, man, I'm alive, and me living my own life happens to be helping, loving, healing, spreading compassion, spreading awakening, whatever it is.
I want to explore, this is a complicated question. Sometimes it's getting a little deeper than we sometimes get in these conversations, which of course is thrilling to me. And so what I wanted to explore as a nuance actually is consistent with another question that one of our viewers had sent in previously about affirmative prayer versus guidance by source. And so this is a subtle distinction for some people. His question was, while unity and science of mind often focus on manifesting intentions through affirmative prayer, it is also true that when one opens up to and aligns with source, it will pull you into a deeper spiritual expression. So the question is, how do we balance working through affirmative prayer to manifest wholesome intentions with opening up to spirit and allowing ourselves to be guided? And your example of the way that nature works in its intrinsic process speaks very directly to this question, which I'd like you to comment further on, because if you're not manifesting from right intention, then the effect upon the whole system will not be an affirmative effect. And there are times when even intention and affirmative prayer is not really our best source of information. Sometimes there's another level where we actually have to surrender to an extent and listen into whether there's guidance even beyond our ability to manufacture an intention, a vision, or an affirmative prayer, to see if there's something that we can't really know yet that's trying to come in from a deeper source of our own selves. And I think that this gets really even deeper into the question of how do you know the difference between what is enlightened self-interest and what is simply self-interest, and what effect does that have on the whole system? So maybe you want to comment a little further about that.
Yeah, well, I think that the second part of that question, where it's like the process of just tuning in and surrendering, and what is here and what is mine to do, without the hold on the affirmations, and really using the prayer method or the practice to demonstrate or to manifest things. I think that key is to recognize that the affirmations are a tool, and they are a tool to get us to the place where we are fully in the flow of life, where there is no distinction between God's will and my will, or true guidance and my own self-interest, where we've entered into the portal where we really are listening, we really have surrendered, we really are in this space that we get it, that there is no distinction between serving myself and serving the greater good, my intention and this global intention. The affirmations are simply a tool to get there. And so if people can move beyond that tool and you can be in that surrender. I think that's a higher vibration. That's a higher way of being. That's why a lot of times, we teach of holding on to a vision, but always say a prayer and saying this or something better. Because we never know if, we're tapping into things to the best of our ability to know, even on the most selfish level, what will make us happy, what will make me feel more peaceful, what will make me feel more whole. And then these affirmations and the prayers that we use are our mind's best intention or best idea of ideating, I think this is how I'd get there. But the more we kind of go along the path, we start to enter a place where we realize, I don't even know if I know, what would actually bring these things. And anyone that's on the path has awoken to a realization that no outer manifestation is going to bring an inner demonstration. So we begin to lift all of these things up and really affirm and pray for what underlies the seemingly material or the manifest. So if someone was, holding an affirmation for something to come to their life, whether it's relationship, job, money, whatever it is, what are we really holding under that? What we're really intending is for a deep sense of peace, a deep sense of wholeness, a deep sense of knowing that love is everywhere present and abundant in each moment, rather than the human self or the ego self or the part of us that just really honorably tries to tap in the best that we know how and what will serve the world or what will serve our own sense of peace. We might think, oh, well, I need this kind of a relationship for it to come. I need this kind of a bank account for it to be here. Those tools are really meant to bring us into a place where we surrender to the kind of more mystical process, I think, which is letting go of any ideas that we know these things or that we could strong arm anything for our own self-interest or for the self-interest of the world. And we find ourselves recognizing that even the things that we get for, what we consider a desire that we want to manifest, that I don't know if that's a stepping stone to something else. I don't know if it's for the purpose of that. And you just start flowing more. You just start going with the kind of the curves of the river, which is your intuition just going, I'm not sure why I'm here, but I'm moving in this direction, and this is what this is about. But always knowing that the underlying current are these God consciousness qualities. And when we know them for ourselves, we know them for all of humanity. So I think it's, part of that is just to recognize that those are tools. If you find yourself not needing those tools anymore, don't, let them go or let them surrender or do this or something better every time, this or something for the greater service, and enter into that space of non-attachment and know that that's a really safe space to be. In fact, surrender and non-attachment and pure intention is, I think, a higher order than goals and human ideas and even our greatest attempt to, capture what we think we're supposed to do, be, or what we think is supposed to unfold. Because actually, the more firm we get in those ideas sometimes, the more we resist what's really going on and we call it wrong and we say it lacks because we have it so firmly held that we sometimes can't see what's in front of us. Like my journey to motherhood right now, it was never anything I thought that it was. I grew up just like anyone else thinking, okay, you go along, there's a perfect timing, you meet the perfect person and you go ahead and you start a family, and that's how it works. If I were to hold on to that, I wouldn't see the possibility and the opportunity that's right in front of me. And I wouldn't have opened up to this whole portal of an extended human family that is creating life and family on a whole nother level in a whole new way, where individuals that don't even know each other are supporting each other, and family is being created and recreated in ways that we may not have even known of when we were younger. When I was in a long-term relationship when I was younger, and I had a dream when it was ending about having a child. And I remember in the dream, because, my mind had always been enmeshed in this idea that these two, we would have children together. And I remember having the dream, and in the dream I was having a child, but there was someone there were people there, but they didn't have faces and they didn't have heads. So there was no man there with a head that it was like, okay, there's your person. And I remember at the time thinking, maybe that just means that I will still have a family one day, but the soul that's coming it's going to be, coming with me or something like that. But it's a whole nother interpretation now, where the stage of life that I'm at, realizing that my brain and my psyche didn't even have a concept for what I would be moving into. But see, in order to do this, I had to let go of those tools that are so strong that, led me to be affirming. And every time I, turn around a corner thinking there's going to be this soulmate person and we're going to do this and we're going to move forward in this way and let this happen. If I hold on to that so tightly, all I can do is look around at what's really happening with disappointment and lack and think, well, that's not enough. Well, that's not it. Well, that's not it. Rather than opening to the portal of, kind of the mystic possibilities that we can see, that every true heart's desire is always right here and is always seeking to fill itself when we surrender, when we look with new eyes, when we let go and we just show up, and we don't have to understand everything, but we can be with the pain, the frustration, the glory, the beauty, the love, the suffering, all of it. And things, I think from that point then just become more rich, and we become more grateful, but not because we're getting things. You know what I mean? Just
Yeah.
because we're...
Yeah, it's a balancing act. And some of the things that you said about, it's the moment when you really let go of all your preconceived notions that what is really meant for you shows up. I have a very good friend here in town that he's a wonderful guy, and he's got spiritual leanings. He happens to be a very successful businessman. He's got a wonderful family. And one of the things that we talk about sometimes is that, when I first met him, one of the first things he said to me was, nothing I ever tried to do in business ever worked. There was no idea or plan that I ever had that was successful. But things that I never even thought of, that I just followed my instincts toward when they showed up and responded to, I guess, in the right manner, those were the things that got activated in my life. Not anything I ever planned, but the things that showed up. And sometimes I'll push back on that a little, and I'll say, well, you can't just, sort of float through your life watching whatever comes by and not taking any responsibilities. And I like to push back at him because I'm also a linear thinker and a left brain person. And I try to balance those two aspects so that there's kind of the right balance between surrender and discipline. That discipline and action and accountability are good qualities. They're not bad words. And something you said before kind of leads into maybe a more practical as we close up the discussion a little. But one of our viewers last time was saying, okay, so what is mine to do? Which certainly represents an ongoing quest for many people. So one of our members and attendees of this webinar, Reverend Ann Thacker, shared with us the suggestion that we need to identify what is not ours to do before we can realize what is ours. So she asks, how does this idea serve those of us who feel we are on a path toward engaged spirituality and spiritual activism? So again, what is not ours to do And how do we hold a correct balance between allowing what comes in without preconception or attachment, and yet being accountable, responsible, and disciplined in the way that we manage these opportunities that come into our lives?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because if opportunities are coming to us and we are so passive or lack discipline and focus to even be able to give them life, give them attention, give them intention, and create from them, then we're just waiting for our lives to be done to us, and that's not the co-creative process. The co-creative process is that we bring life to things, that we actually create. And so I think that is a big key. And I resonate a lot with what your friend said. I feel like a lot of my life has kind of gone along that path. I get things and I get them, but I hold them and then I just watch, rather than, being really goal oriented and being like, I have these goals and then I've got to power them. It's just a light shift in that distinction where, I'll get things and then I'm just listening and exploring and going, okay, so I'm seeing this. This has my attention. I recognize it. And that seems to be all that I need to do, is to recognize it. But then when the time comes for action, in fact, Reverend Kevin Ross was just speaking at my center a few weeks ago, and there was a piece where he said something about preparation and what is ours to do. And I'm not going to be able to remember it exactly, but he said it's not about moving things forward, and pressing them in, but it's about being prepared and ready when the moment arrives. And so I think that's the key for me. The key has always been being prepared in consciousness for when I start seeing the energy move, or I start seeing something come into play, and being prepared to be courageous, being prepared to say yes, being prepared to apply those qualities that you were just speaking of. Because if we're not, good luck and, something happening for you and to you without your own ability to presence it and to show up and to be able to have the consciousness to behold it and co-create with it. And then what was the second part of what you were talking about, the minister that brought up a point?
This is something that, because AG&T's mission in New Thought, serving all of the New Thought organizations, is especially concerned with what we've been calling in various terms spiritually guided social activism. And so we're educating and leading positions and projects and providing information to people in the New Thought community who feel that they're now ready to be spiritually guided social activists.
Yeah.
Take their concern for society out of the meditation room, even out of the church, and into their daily lives, into the community where people are really in need. So I guess that the second part of the question, in fact, it leads into the last questions I'm going to ask you, so I think I'll move forward with those.
Yeah.
Because they lead right into this idea of, for those people who do now want to be of service in their communities to the society, using spiritual principle as their foundation. And it's a time when society is so bifurcated and polarized. The part one of the question is, how can faith communities such as New Thought serve as unifiers and healers of these wounds? And the second part of the question is, do you think that religion and spiritual community still serves in the role as sacred keeper of absolute or universal truths in this era of fake news? And for every citizen on Facebook that considers him or herself an expert, how can a spiritual tradition, whether it is New Thought or any other religion, claim to be a voice of moral authority that we should trust? So how do we become agents of spiritually guided activism from our spiritual foundations? And how is it that we can look to a tradition like New Thought to be a source of moral authority or values that help guide us along this path?
Okay, good. So there's a lot there. One of the pieces tying in from where we were was, how do we know what not to put our attention on? What not to do or whatever. I think one of the keys there is when we get into something and we want to help, but we feel like we don't know what we could do. How can we, participate and engage spirituality? How can I bring the solution, to this? I think one of the key is recognizing that it's not just all ours to do. There are some times when we look at it and go, that piece is not mine to do. But what we can always do is find someone that's doing it well and support them, get on board and empower them. So when we find someone that's vitally alive with one of these causes that we're passionate about, but we don't know all of what's ours to do, it's like follow the leader, get involved and start supporting the person or the people or the events or the activities. Don't worry about recreating all of your own things, but just get there where you see someone passionate about a piece and they actually are getting and knowing the steps. Empower them, support that activity, support that action, and do it fearlessly. A lot of times I think what can happen is people's minds go, well, I want to participate, but I don't believe all of these things that the person's saying, or I maybe don't want to identify, if I'm going to a rally and there's going to be some people that are going to be hateful there or saying things that are not new thought, against everything. I don't want to be associated with that. Well, be the change that you want to see. Be in that and bring what you bring. That's one of the keys in New Thought. I think that's one of our gifts, is that we know there is no other, there is no group. There are collectives and there are collective energies. So let go of that fear that if I show up, I'm going to be identified with every aspect of whatever it is, and bring your gift, bring your sign, bring your comments, bring your feedback, bring your insights, bring your intelligence to all of these ways that we can engage our spirituality and get it out of the church. I think sometimes there's some fear of being in action, and to some degree it's rightful fear, because you do get feedback and you got to be willing to get feedback. But, there's some quote about that, about if you're not, creating some crunchies here and there, you're probably not doing anything, so be less worried about doing everything right and be more inspired about showing up with your voice, showing up with your action. I think that we're at a time where we are asked to come out of the sanctuary and to make the sanctuary come alive in the world around us. And so as for the future of New Thought, or the future of spiritual centers, everything is showing me that all of those boundaries or separations, how we act outside of the center and how we act inside of the center, how we act on Sunday and how we act on other days, all of those lines are just, going out the door. And we're called to be integrating our spirituality. And that means integrating it in action and really showing up in the community. And so I think that's key. I think that's important. And I think that when we look to New Thought or any other religion or center to be the voice of moral authority that we can trust, I just think we're waking up to spiritual maturity and recognizing that, yes, organizations can make statements, but never take someone else's or some organization's idea over trusting your own heart. Again, we have a guidance system inside. It's not rocket science to know that you should treat other people with decency, love, and honor and respect. It's not rocket science to know that if someone's born onto this planet, they have every right to be on this planet and have resources and have kindness and compassion shown to them. If whatever organization that we're with or we're a part of is not in integrity with love and a higher vibration of consciousness, then confront it, or, be in it, but be of your own, So I think when we find that place where our organizations, what they're standing for resonates with our heart, and it's like oxygen going, oh, I'm so glad someone put words to that truth. I think we know we're in the right place, and then we can trust that. But as far as just blanketly, a blanket trust on a religious authority, I think those days are over. I think the day has come that we really get that when we see it out there and it resonates within us, that's when we're to pay attention. That's when everything's aligned of going, yeah, that's the truth, or that's guidance, or that's wisdom to the best of my ability. That's love to the highest expression.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful what you've done is sort of, you've represented another polarity that we struggle with sometimes, is when we want to look to a source of authority, especially a sacred authority, not relying solely on ourselves for all the answers, that's a good thing. But then the polarity that it balances against is, when is it that you trust the humanity of your own intrinsic self, or your own intrinsic guidance?
Yeah.
It seems to fly in the face of what your authority is telling you. And I think that that's a very important distinction, because it's not one or the other, it's both. And there are some authoritarian, both governmental and religious authorities now, that aren't trusting and respecting their own constituents enough to be able to follow their own minds and their own hearts. And there's a very famous quote from Buddhism where Buddha was basically saying the same thing as you're now representing New Thought to believe, which is, if you see me on the path, kill me. Which basically means, it isn't about listening to me or following me or adopting everything that I've said. That's my life, that's my journey. And I can guide you to an extent, but when the rubber hits the road, you have to practice, through and as yourself, what wisdom you have picked up through the source of your religion, and through the source of your life, and through the source of your relationships. And the wonderful expression spiritual maturity is really a manifestation of all this. And before I ask you for your concluding remarks, I also wanted to bring in the remembrance of one of AG&T's friends, Brother Wayne Teasdale, who was a Benedictine monk and a Hindu sannyasi, very good friend of mine for many years. He died in 2005. And he wrote a book called A Monk in the World, among other of his books. And it was revolutionary at its time, because he had actually left the monastery because he felt it was time to take his mystical and sacred training and put it on the ground in the world when it came to issues of Tibet and poverty and racism and injustice and economic disparity. And in order to do that, he needed to be able to listen less to the Catholic Church and their positions, although in many ways they are on the right side of those issues and in some ways not. But he needed to learn how to trust himself and take his monastic ministry into the world itself. And that was what made him the great person that he was as a monk and as a human being. So we're wrapping up here. So I'm just going to ask you if you'd like to share some concluding remarks, some wisdom that you'd like to leave everyone with, because this has been such an interesting discussion, and I really appreciate having had it with you. So what do you think?
I appreciate it as well. I think that's a beautiful closing key, is to recognize that, look at the Pope right now. Look at John Shelby Spong. Look at the monk that you're talking about, your friend. They were in a system or an organization or a formation, and they got an even higher idea that led them to break some of the crystallized notions around how to show up, or rules and dogma. The master teacher, Jesus, same thing, right? Like in the middle of some structure got a higher order and a higher call and broke out of that structure. I think there's a lot of the human condition that wants to stay comfortable and wants to do things right. If we're going to live an engaged life of spiritual practice and breaking down all the walls between our spiritual practice and our human life, like, totally breaking through the spiritual condition and the human condition are two different things, but just breaking into our wholeness and allowing it to be. There's going to be times that life is uncomfortable, and there's going to be some steps. There are going to be some steps that we have to take that we're not going to know whether or not we're doing it right or whatever it is. And we're going to be scared for anyone to be watching us or following us. Those are the keys that will deepen our practice and help us to tune into the heart and trust the heart and follow our guidance and follow our inspiration to show up. We're, to some degree, always living in uncharted territory. And that doesn't have to be terrifying. In fact, that can be empowering and engaging. And we can, kind of going back to the first part of our discussion, we can really find ourselves living in a different life on this planet, a life that embraces our fullness. But we have to take the leap into that. And the ability we have to be comfortable in discomfort is amazing, and we can get there. But just to remember that our spiritual practice is here to support us, coming from a place of grounded, centered expression, coming from a place of peace, and then activating in our world. And so to really, let go of all the attachments to being safe, to being right, to living fearlessly and showing up. And knowing that, just as much as we want to have compassion in the outer world, we can have self-compassion for knowing that we are, pioneering this this life that we're living right now. And I think the more we give ourselves compassion, the more our hearts open for compassion for everything that's going on in the world, and we just begin to activate together from a deeper, more connected level that just models who and whose we are. And so to be able to do that fearlessly and just recognize what we are on a core level as spiritual beings.
That's beautiful. That's a wonderful place to leave it. I want to thank you so much. I know how full your life is these days, and you're kind of on a roller coaster, so that makes me even more appreciative that you've done this with us today. And I wanted to thank the viewers. Thanks for tuning into these programs, because this is where we have the conversations that matter to AGNT and that we hope are going to matter to you. You're going to plug into things here that you might not hear in your church, or you might not hear in your New Thought organization, because we're taking Reverend Erin's advice and we're trying to move out onto the edge and take some risks and try to learn from mistakes. If we happen to falter, at least we'll know what we did wrong and do it better next time. But we think that we really need to be of service. And the only way to be that is to take a leap of faith. So thank you for tuning in. Our next webinar for the AGNT Leadership Forum will be a live webinar. It will be on July 30th with Dr. David Alexander, who is the Senior Minister of New Thought Center for Spiritual Living in Lake Oswego, Oregon. And please check out the website. It has a lot of information. It's at agnt.today. And if you're looking for something and you're frustrated and you can't find it, just go to the contact form and send me a quick email. I answer them personally. And if I'll direct you to the right place or answer your question or help you sign up for a free salon, there's a lot of good resources there, and they're there for you. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks to Reverend Erin. And we will see you soon. Bye.